Thank you for choosing American Pest CEUs.
Hi, I'm Sean Reeves with American Pest CEUs. I've been in the pest management industry since 1999. I'm an associate certified entomologist, and I'll be your instructor for today's course. Today's course was compiled by Jack Launius, who has served in the pest management industry since 1990. Today's course is titled Notorious House Mouse, Mus musculus. The house mouse is believed to have originated in Central Asia. The above Latin name, Mus domesticus, as well as the Latin name Mus musculus linnaeus, are used in the nomenclature for the present-day house mouse depending on specific geographic areas. The Latin word for mouse is mus, which is derived from the ancient Sanskrit language meaning to steal. The word musculus simply means little thief. The relationship between mankind and the mouse started long ago, as they have traveled with us as stowaways throughout early trade routes and have continued to use mankind and his food supplies to extend their range to most parts of the world today. Overview of the course. Learning objectives. Identification of the house mouse, understanding its life cycle and reproduction, awareness of economic, structural, and health-related damages, strategies for effective management and control, course outline, identification and biology, health risk, damage impacts, prevention and control strategies, modern innovations. House mice occur throughout the United States, often intimately associated with people. But house mice are occasionally found living in the wild, competing with native fauna. They are common inhabitants of grassy fields and cultivated grain crops. They have been captured in open tundra in Alaska, miles away from human settlements. The house mouse, Mus musculus, is an agile little rodent. Adult weights vary from region to region and may be linked to the suitability of habitat, but usually range from 1/2 to 1 ounce. Adult house mice vary in color from light brown to dark gray, but most are often a dusky gray or medium brown over most of their bodies, except the belly, which may be a slightly lighter shade of their general color or may be cream colored. The mouse has moderately large ears for its body. The tail is nearly hairless and about as long as the body, 2.5 to 4 inches. The feet and eyes are small in proportion to its body. The house mouse is the most successful rodent in adapting to life with people. It thrives in a wide range of climatic conditions in a great variety of habitats, feeding on nearly any human food and reproducing at a remarkable rate. It is found in most areas of the world populated by humans. Mice are active mostly at night. Some day activity is common, however. Movements of house mice are largely determined by temperature, food, and hiding places. Home ranges of mice tend to be the smallest, where living conditions are good. We made a couple good points here. One about the mouse activity being nocturnal. So when people hear those scratching sounds at night, a lot of times it is going to be mice, especially if it's in like walls, ceilings, up in attics, areas like that. And just remember, the home ranges of mice tend to be the smallest where living conditions are good. So where they have the good food, shelter, temperature, water, hiding places, that's where you're going to see them forage less. If you don't have all those things, they're going to tend to forage more, which may be good in some ways, because if you don't have all those things like in the structure you're at, then the chances of them infesting are not as good, because the reality is they're going to have to forage too far for food. But we also need to keep in mind, if our structure is providing that shelter, they will still come in and they will hoard up food even if they have to forage a wider range for it. Curiosity. Mice tend to travel over their entire territory daily, aggressively investigating each change or new object that may be placed there. Unlike rats, they show little fear of new objects. So because of the fact that mice are curious like this, one thing you're going to hear about as you go through training on mice and things like that is that they'll go into traps much quicker than something like a rat. So keeping in mind that they are going to forage less of an area usually than something larger like a rat, but also keeping in mind that trapping can work a lot quicker when we're dealing with mice because they are curious and they will go into our traps a little bit quicker. They use their long, sensitive whiskers near the nose and the guard hairs on the body as tactile sensors to enable them to travel in the dark, scurrying through burrows, or pressing against walls and boxes. This is the reasons that traps are so much more effective when set against a wall, storage box, or other object. Mice also have an excellent sense of balance. So the bottom line here on this slide is we're just saying, okay, got it. Again, we're introducing a couple good things here on this slide. The fact that these mice are going to scurry around through these burrows, but keeping in mind when you set traps, it's going to be much more effective if they're up against something. So mice will navigate along walls, along boxes, along any type of storage thing. Whatever it is, they want to navigate along something. So keep in mind when you set traps, you want to put them right along something that's like a... So keep in mind when you set traps, you want to put them right along something that they can navigate against. Mice typically aren't going to go out into an open area. Like I'll see people set traps in the middle of an attic with nothing around. That's not really going to help you catch mice. Could it happen? It could, but it's going to take longer and it's going to be much harder. We definitely want to put traps in areas where they're navigating along an object. A mouse's ability to quickly carry out actions or movements is governed by constant practice of sequences of muscular movements, sometimes referred to as kinesthetic sense. A mouse essentially programs muscles, tendons, and nerves to follow a set path through the territory. This kinesthetic sense allows mice to quickly escape danger. A mouse's kinesthetic sense refers to its ability to perceive the position and movement of its body, primarily through tactile information gathered from its whiskers, allowing it to navigate its environment effectively, especially in dark spaces, by remembering the sequence of movements needed to reach a specific location within its territory, essentially acting as a muscle memory for movement patterns. They rely more on their kinesthetic sense, which is a subconscious recording of a series of movements necessary to go from point A to point B, rather than on their eyes, ears, and nose. So again, this kinesthetic sense is pretty amazing. They're not even relying as much on their eyes, ears, or nose because this kinesthetic sense is so powerful for them. Whisking is the pattern movement of whiskers by repetitive rapid protraction and retraction during scanning the environment. Whiskers are present as small, fine hairs on the snout of mice and rats when they are born and develop two distinct types of hairs. Longer, prominent hairs are formed, two-dimensional grid of 5 rows on the snout, macrovibrissae, and shorter hairs covering the snout and lift surfaces, microvibrissae. Because of the mouse's curiosity, a well-designed mouse management program can demonstrate success quickly, just the opposite of rat programs. Range. Mice are territorial and seldom travel more than 30 feet from their nest. The range is much smaller than rats' range of 100 to 150 feet. When food is nearby, mice can restrict their activity to just a few feet. Male territories are usually slightly larger than female territories. Distinctive features: large, rounded ears relative to head size, small, black, bead-like eyes, pointed snout with prominent whiskers. Adaptations for survival: flexible skeleton allows mice to squeeze through openings as small as 1/4 inch. Enhanced senses: acute sense of smell for detecting food, excellent hearing to identify predators and navigate environments, poor vision, but strong reliance on whiskers for tactile feedback. Physical abilities: for their size, they are excellent jumpers. Agile individuals can jump 12 inches, 30.5 centimeters, high from the floor onto an elevated flat surface. So keep in mind, a lot of you think about mice just navigating along floors, staying really low, but the fact that they can jump up to 12 inches does help them get up into areas. So don't just think they just sit on the floor. They spring up pretty high with their back legs and can jump up to that 12 inches high. You know, sometimes mice remind me of a cat in the way they can jump from a high area. They can jump from a height of 8 feet, 2.5 meters to the floor. They can jump against a wall or flat vertical surface, using it as a springboard to gain additional height. One thing that's good to note is when you're going out to inspect properties and you're looking for mice, don't just look low, look up higher, especially anywhere where there's stored food or items where they could nest. I can't tell you how many times I've found mice 8 or 10 feet up in a garage or somewhere with a bunch of shelves. Basically, they're just jumping and bouncing and just working their way up. So don't think they're just going to be at floor level. I keep saying that because it's a reality that a lot of technicians will miss mice on an inspection because they don't look up a little higher, because in their mind, mice are just scurrying along the floor. They can run up almost any vertical surface, from wood and brick walls to metal girders, pipes, weathered sheet metal, wire mesh, and cables without much difficulty if the surface is rough. So here again we can see, can a mouse climb right up a brick wall? Absolutely they can, and I've seen this many times. You know, now that we have technologies like wildlife cameras and even these Ring doorbell cameras, you see these things. For many years technicians didn't think that this was possible, but now we're capturing it on camera. As we mentioned, mice are mostly nocturnal, so you typically wouldn't see it during the daytime. I know I've been doing this since 1999. I've never seen it during the daytime, but I've definitely seen it on videos. So let's just keep in mind, anytime you're looking at the exterior of a structure, especially on inspections, you got to find any areas where they could be getting in, around the soffits, around the eaves, because if they're able to climb the side of the house and get their way up there, mice need what? Maybe about 1/4 of an inch, maybe a little bit bigger to get in. In reality, you can easily miss an area if you're not doing a great inspection and understanding what type of material the walls are made out of from the outside of the home, because if they're made of any rough surface, the mice are going to work their way right up anytime they want to. Here's another interesting fact. They can run horizontally along insulated electrical wires, small ropes, and the like with ease. And I have seen this before. Actually, during the daytime, I've seen a mouse navigate an electrical wire from one structure to another. So I can tell you, this is not just filler content. This is something that really happens. So keep in mind, if you're looking for mouse infestations, sometimes you're going to have to look at the fact that they may be coming in on ropes, electrical wires, whatever could be coming over to a structure. And that's one way they could be getting on the roof line and working their way into the attic. Because I know a lot of people just don't understand, like, how do mice get in the attic? And we just talked about the walls, any rough surface from the outside. But obviously also, if you're in an area that has brick buildings and things like that, the mice can work their way up one building, go across an electrical line, and end up in another building. This can really fool people on inspections, and again, I keep saying this because if you miss that one area, it's going to be the area they're getting in, and you're never going to solve the mouse problem. And you may be surprised to know they are capable swimmers, although they generally do not take to water as well as do rats, and do not tend to dive below the surface. So mice can swim, so don't get the idea that water is going to be a barrier to them. They can swim right across. Now granted, as we talked about, things like roof rats, they tend to like to swim even more, but just keep in mind that mice can swim and they can navigate through a waterway. So just how good of swimmers are mice? Mice have great endurance and flexibility. Mice can swim and tread water for up to 3 days. When completely submerged, mice can also hold their breath for up to 3 minutes. So once again, I think we've landed the plane on the fact that water is not stopping mice, and it's pretty amazing what they can do around waterways. In other tidbits, they can walk or run along ledges too narrow for rats. They can survive for generations at a constant temperature of 24 degrees Fahrenheit or negative 4 degrees Celsius. So the reality is, those of you in the United States, they definitely can live in pretty much every climate we have here. When it says a constant temperature of 24 degrees, obviously anything warmer than that's going to be even better for them. But the bottom line is that most places, no matter where you're at, you're going to have a constant temperature of that. Now, when you go into places like the Arctic, obviously it's cooler. But the point is, they can be in and around structures enough too that they can survive, because they are very commensal in as much as they do want to be with humans anyways, because of the access to food, water, and harborage. They have been reported to be living 1,800 feet, 550 meters below the ground in a coal mine in England. And this is just another testament of their adaptability and their resilience to live in almost any area where humans are around. Feeding habits. Opportunistic omnivores, favoring grains, seeds, fruits, and protein sources like nuts. Known for hoarding food in hidden locations, house mice feed on a wide range of foods, although cereals seem preferred over other items. In particular, the germ of grains is favored by most mice. As supplemental diet items, mice often show preference for foods high in fat and protein, such as dry dog food, nuts, and dried meats. House mice are sporadic feeders, nibbling bits of food in various locations throughout their range. I can tell you firsthand, when it comes to preferred food for mice in residential structures, dog food has been my number one source. I think this is especially because a lot of people leave it out when they feed their dogs. They leave the dry dog food out, or they have bags of it stored in garages or in areas where mice can get access. They've got shelter, and what do you know, they have food right in the same area. So just keep in mind, anytime you're looking for mice, you may find dry dog food stored up in any area, like hoarded in an area, because mice are going to take it with them and they're going to set it up to where they have that constant food source. So one of the big things I tell my customers to do is make sure mice don't have access to dry dog food. Now, this is not the only food that I obviously want to restrict access to, but I find that dry dog food is my number one culprit for mice to store up, to hoard, and be able to live for long periods of time in a structure. Even when we're doing exclusion work and trapping, they've got that consistent food source. It's just going to take that much longer to solve the problem. They require only 1/10 of an ounce of food per day. Peak feeding periods are at dusk and around dawn, but because of their small size, mice must feed several times during a 24-hour period, and thus are active day and night. They also cache food as supply permits. They can go long periods of time without free water, obtaining water from food. However, it is not true to say they don't need water. Nesting habits. Nests constructed from spreaded materials such as paper, fabric, or plant matter. Common nesting locations include wall voids, attics, and storage areas close to food sources. Recognizing an infestation. Droppings, fresh gnaw marks, and tracks indicate areas where mice are active. Mouse nests, made from fine shredded paper or other fibrous material, are often found in sheltered locations. House mice have a characteristic musky odor that identifies their presence. Mice are active mostly at night, but can be seen occasionally during daylight hours. Mice are capable of producing up to 3,000 microdroplets of urine in a single 24-hour period. Rodent urine fluoresces under ultraviolet light. Also, house mice will typically produce between 50 to 75 fecal pellets every day. These are 3 to 7 millimeter pellets and usually have either one or both ends pointed. There are exceptions to this. I can tell you from my own experience too, using things like ultraviolet lights, this really helps in areas like attics. If you have it really dark in there and you don't have a flashlight on and you go in with an ultraviolet light, I can tell you that urine will just glow, kind of like you're seeing in the image here. Now the fecal pellets are a little bit different because they are only 3 to 7 millimeters. They're going to be much smaller. They can be harder to find, but because of the fact that they continuously drop them, at some point you're going to notice those pellets. Just keep in mind they're usually pointed on one or both ends, typically more both in what I've seen. There could be an exception to this, as we mentioned here, but I like the ultraviolet lights. Look for discoloration on insulation anyways, but the ultraviolet's great. And then, of course, those droppings, and you'll put two and two together in areas like attics really quickly. We also need to think about recognizing an infestation. When we think about the droppings with a house mouse, they're going to be small, dark, rice-shaped droppings. They're going to be found near food sources, nesting sites, and pathways. Obviously, there are some other things that could throw us off and make us think we're seeing house mouse droppings. For instance, we can look at the Norway rat. The difference with them is they're going to be 14 to 19 millimeters, so they're going to be much larger than house mouse droppings, 4 or 5 times the size, and they're going to have rounded ends. With the roof rat, they're going to have pointed ends, but they're going to be larger as well, 7 to 14 millimeters. So you need to get yourself familiarized with the different droppings, whether it be a Norway rat, roof rat, or a house mouse, so when you are out in the field you'll understand the difference in them. But number one is going to be the size. I've typically learned after doing this for almost 30 years that the size of the droppings are really going to tell me what I need to know. Something else we need to think about is what other rodents are in my area. So we're going out and we're doing an inspection and we think it's the house mouse, which is pretty common for most of us, but we need to know the range of the other rats that could be in our area. For instance, look at this. The range of roof rats is along the lower half of the East Coast and throughout the Gulf states and upward into Arkansas. They also exist along the Pacific coast and are found on the Hawaiian Islands. Now I can tell you this is true because I've seen it in a lot of these areas. I haven't been to Hawaii yet, but I can tell you that the Gulf states definitely have the roof rats. Also going up the Mississippi River, I've seen them up in Memphis and areas like that, and even eastern Arkansas. So definitely an issue in that area. But keep in mind, if you're in Nebraska, the chances of you seeing a roof rat aren't that good, right? So at the end of the day, you wouldn't even get confused on what species you were looking at. We also need to look at another rodent that could be in our range. This time we're looking at the Norway rat, which was unintentionally introduced to North America by settlers who arrived on ships from Europe. First introduced into the United States about 1775, this rat is now spread throughout the contiguous 48 states. So the good news here is, unless you're in Alaska or Hawaii, you're probably going to see a Norway rat at some point if you're in this industry. But keeping in mind, it's just always good to know what type of species are in your area so you don't mistake one for the other. Further, in recognizing an infestation, we need to look for gnaw marks. This could be evidence on wood, plastic, and electrical wiring. Continuous gnawing is necessary to maintain toothling. So basically, when we're dealing with any type of rodents, whether it's the house mouse, the roof rat, Norway rats, their teeth are always growing, so they're always chewing or gnawing to keep them filed down. You're definitely going to want to look around any wood, any plastic, and even electrical wiring for chewing marks. This is really concerning. I can't tell you how many times through the years I've seen electrical wiring coating kind of chewed off. It's a really big deal, and when you show that to your customer, they're going to think it is as well. So keep in mind, part of our issue with rodents is not just the fact of them leaving the urine, the droppings, and people not wanting to see them. They can also be a fire hazard to homes as well. Again, thinking about recognizing an infestation, we're going to need to listen for scratching sounds. Now these are typically going to be heard at night in walls, ceilings, or attics. So of course, when you're there, you're usually doing your inspection during the daytime, so you may not hear these sounds. That's why it's so important to work hand in hand with your customer and ask the right questions. A simple question would be, what time of day are you hearing the sounds? What does it sound like? A chirping sound, a scratching sound, a banging or pecking sound? These could all be several different things. But if we're hearing these scratching sounds and we're hearing them at night, There's a good chance that it is the house mouse, but we just need to make sure, as we talked about. It could be a Norway rat, a roof rat, house mouse, or whatever, but at the end of the day, you need to know what time of day these are being heard, and typically you would get that information from your customer. With recognizing an infestation, we need to think about things like visual clues, pathways. This could be grease marks along walls and frequent travel routes, footprints, visible in dusty areas. Tracks often include tail drag marks. Another thing we need to look for in recognizing an infestation is nest. Look for nests made from shredded insulation, cardboard, or other soft materials. And I would just note here, you're going to be looking for nests in a lot of different areas. Attics are always a good area because it's one of those areas they love to get in and kind of nest around the insulation and shred it up. But also places like garages. A lot of times I'll see mice nesting in a garage. They'll get in behind shelving and areas like that. They'll tear up some sort of paper or insulation, whatever they can find, and they'll make a nest. But keep in mind, mice nests can be just about anywhere, but you are going to look for these shredded materials when looking for them. Let's look at advanced detection techniques. Use of UV light. UV light can make otherwise invisible urine trails glow, providing a clear indication of mouse activity in pathways. And we talked a little bit about this earlier, but nothing's going to work better than some of these advanced techniques where you can make that urine glow. The droppings themselves can be really hard to see in certain areas. That's where I really love to use these UV lights, where I can make those urine trails glow and show me exactly where the mice are active. Just keep in mind that that area is going to have to be dark. If it's a lighted area, this is going to be of no help to you at all. Also, with advanced detection techniques, we can look at motion-sensitive cameras. Cameras equipped with motion detectors can capture footage of nocturnal activity, helping to locate nesting sites and the severity of infestations. So we talked about this before, but again, these rodents are going to be active at night, and there's nothing better than these types of technologies. Now, we talked before even about Ring cameras, but you can set these cameras up on a property. You have to make sure they have good batteries or they plug in a good spot, whatever you need. But I really like these when we start looking at rodents in general. In my mind, they're kind of like that 24-hour day. In my mind, they're kind of like that 24-hour-a-day inspector that's always there when you can't be. When we're thinking about inspections on these properties, for us, we might spend a half hour, an hour, maybe even an hour and a half doing an inspection, but that's all the time we're ever going to get. So if you're not checking into technologies like these motion-sensitive cameras, you definitely should, and I can tell you it's going to give you a lot more information. It's going to help you solve problems and make your customers a lot happier in the long run. Also, with advanced detection techniques, we can look at tracking powders. These fine powders adhere to the fur of mice, leaving visible trails as they move through an area. The trails can lead directly to nests or food sources. Again, with advanced detection techniques, we need to look at things like digital monitoring systems. Modern systems incorporate IoT, Internet of Things, technology to provide real-time updates on rodent activity, including alerts for pest control professionals. The adoption of new technologies, including data-rich, connected feeds powered by the Internet of Things, is transforming many industries, and pest control is no exception. This new approach moves the industry away from traditional, reactive, and labor-intensive methods towards proactive, more precise strategies driven by data. By leveraging sensor technology and applying real-time data analytics, IoT solutions offer enhanced accuracy, efficiency, and effectiveness in rodent control, as well as important benefits in terms of environmental, sustainability, and the allocation of labor. The remote monitoring marriage of deployed sensors, both in bait boxes and outside them in rodent transit areas, and algorithms designed to filter out false positives and to distinguish rodent activity from other types of movement, ensures maximum possible accuracy. If we think about it, the future of rodent control is here. The traditional, time-consuming method of manually checking traps just got a lot smarter thanks to the science of IoT. What does IoT enable when it meets a device like a mousetrap? 24/7 monitoring, real-time capture alerts, and up-to-the-minute program verification. This means that instead of getting caught up in the cycle of checking and scanning empty traps, now there is the ability to immediately respond to a capture alert and spend the time needed to identify the root cause of the problem. The result? Improved efficiency, audit readiness, and protection for your business, brand, and public health. Technology matters. Before taking a shot in the dark, you need to understand that many types of technology exist on the market, each with unique features and varying levels of detection, sensitivity, and accuracy. Understanding the pros and cons of available systems is a vital ingredient for success. Not all network platforms are created equal. Network connectivity in complex environments is a key feature to look for when considering digital rodent systems in order to ensure your system is working reliably 24/7. Everyone is familiar with cellular and Wi-Fi networks, but did you know that these communication platforms can be challenged in factories, food processing facilities, convention centers, and other complex environments? False positives are common in many technologies available today. False capture alerts destroy the value proposition of remote monitoring and cause headaches and unnecessary labor. Be sure you understand this key performance metric and invest in a system that has solved this issue. A few more quick notes when it comes to remote rodent monitoring. This is a really great idea. As many of you understand, it's very labor intensive. It takes a lot of time to go back and check traps all the time. A lot of times these traps are in areas that are inaccessible without a ladder, so you got to think in your mind, we're going to save ourselves a lot of work by using these. You also have to understand that learning to use these technologies can take some time. So first, you definitely got to learn whatever technology you decide to purchase, and then also you're going to have to make sure it works. At the end of the day, I really like these technologies because one problem I see in the rodent industry, people forget to go and check traps. I have people that go and they do exclusion work, they'll set traps, and then they can't figure out a way to set a schedule to recheck them. And then how many times do you check them and how often do you check them? So in my mind, this is a great idea. I really think everybody should look at these technologies. As we know in business, just like everything else, you got to find things that save time and money to be successful in today's business climate. Let's talk about disease transmission when it comes to the house mouse. Zoonotic diseases. Pathogens directly or indirectly transmitted to humans by mice. Thinking about disease transmission, let's look at number 1, hantavirus pulmonary syndrome HPS. Transmission. Inhalation of airborne particles from mouse urine, droppings, or saliva. Symptoms: fever, muscle aches, fatigue, progressing to severe respiratory distress. The second disease we want to look at when it comes to disease transmission is leptospirosis transmission. Skin contact with water or soil contaminated by infected urine. Symptoms: high fever, headache, muscle pain, jaundice, and kidney damage. When it comes to disease transmission, we also need to think about salmonellosis. Transmission is going to be by ingesting food or water contaminated with mouse feces. Symptoms: nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, and abdominal cramps. Our next disease associated with the house mouse is lymphocytic choriomeningitis virus, LCMV. Transmission: contact with saliva or urine of infected mice. Symptoms: flu-like symptoms with potential neurological complications. With disease transmission, we need to think about the historical context. What is the role of rodents in transmitting Yersinia pestis bubonic plague through fleas? Now, many of you understand the bubonic or black plague was a huge deal back in the day. Obviously, it ended up killing like 25% of Europe's population when it came through. So we're not going to talk a lot about that, but you do need to understand that it wasn't carried by the house mouse, and you also need to understand the cycle. So it started with an infected rodent that was bitten by the rat flea, and then the rat flea bit the human who was the host. So the reality was at that point is that it just spread from human to human, especially with all the rats and fleas back in those times. There was nothing to really stop it. But you definitely need to know about things like the bubonic plague, because you're always going to get people concerned about what they would call the black plague nowadays, just because it was such a big deal in history. And occasionally now we do have an outbreak here and there, but it's not a real common thing. In the next section, we're going to talk about the life cycle of the house mouse. Reproductive behavior, mating behavior, breeds year-round under favorable conditions. Females mate with multiple males to increase genetic diversity of offspring. Litter size and frequency. Average litter is going to be 6 to 12 pups. One female can produce 30 to 60 offspring annually. So this is kind of giving you an idea when you're talking to your customers of just how quickly mice can reproduce and how quickly they can take over a structure. And that's one of the reasons why it is very important for you to understand the reproductive biology of the house mouse or any type of rodent, because people don't really know how quickly they can take over until they see these numbers. Development stages. 1. Neonatal. Born hairless and blind, weigh approximately 1 gram at birth, begin suckling immediately, develop fur within 1 week. 2. Juvenile. Eyes open at 10 to 14 days, start exploring outside the nest at 2 weeks, fully weaned by 21 days. 3. Adult. Reach sexual maturity at 6 to 8 weeks. Lifespan varies on predation and environment, typically 1 year in the wild and up to 2 years in captivity. Basically, we're saying here mice are born hairless and blind, so keep in mind if you're finding them hairless, that's going to be a newborn. Now they're going to develop fur within about a week, so that gives you an idea of the age of a newborn when you're looking at it. As far as that goes, within about 2 weeks, they're going to start exploring outside the nest, and in 21 days they're fully weaned and on their own. And again, the reason why we're saying this is because you need to know these things. You need to understand at that 21-day mark, those mice are going to start leaving the nest. And as you can imagine, as we're talking about number 3 here, they reach sexual maturity in 6 to 8 weeks. So then again, at that 6 to 8 week mark, they're going to start reproducing and this cycle starts all over again. I also think this can be very useful in a situation where a customer says to you, "Hey, I've only seen one mouse." Well, let me tell you about their life cycle and how quickly they reproduce. Newborn mice are quite undeveloped, weighing between 0.02 and 0.03 ounce, and are nearly hairless. Eyes and ears are closed, but by the end of 2 weeks, the body is covered with hair, and the eyes and ears are open. At about 3 weeks, the young begin short trips away from the nest and begin taking solid food. Let's look at the economic impacts of rodents. On a global scale, rodents, including the house mouse, cause an estimated $20 billion in damages annually worldwide. Let's think about agricultural losses, spoilage and contamination of stored grains, leading to reduced market value and financial losses for farmers. Or pest control costs. These are going to be ongoing expenses for professional extermination services, baiting systems, and property modifications. Business impacts, loss of reputation and potential closure of businesses such as restaurants and grocery stores due to infestations. Insurance costs, increased premiums or denial of claims related to rodent-induced damages. There's a lot we're really talking about on this slide. These agricultural losses can be devastating for farmers. At the point where their grains get contaminated with rodent droppings and things like that, it can be almost devastating to their whole crop. So you have to really think about how important the impact of rodents are on things like agricultural areas, and that's why pest control is so important in those areas. Now obviously you guys understand this if you've been in the industry for any length of time. It's a huge expense to do rodent work. especially when you look at stores like Walmart's or Publix or Kroger's, whatever supermarkets you have in your areas. How many of you do rodent work on bigger buildings like that? You may have things like tin cats, you may have rodent bait stations all over the property. Think about the cost of this. I mean, this is a very significant cost. At the same point in time, if these stores don't take care of these things, they're not going to be in business. They're either going to go out of business because of the loss of reputation, as we're talking about here, or even be closed up, such as restaurants and grocery stores that get infested. I've dealt with grocery stores. I'm not going to name the ones, but a lot of them out there, several different ones actually. And I've had times where the health department came in and actually shut a store down because the mouse problem was so bad. This is actually in Tennessee where I dealt with this. So this is a really big problem. So you guys have to understand that when it comes to your reputation and or sanitation standards by things like the health department, we have to remember what we're doing out there in these services has a big impact, but we also have to understand the importance of it. And I'm saying this especially in commercial settings, because when a business loses its reputation or gets closed down by a regulatory agency, they've got a major problem on their hands. And just keeping in mind, when it comes to insurance, typically I've seen denial of claims on anything related to rodents. Doesn't matter if they damage insulation in an attic or they chew up wiring. I'm not seeing insurance companies cover this. Now, some of you may say something different, and I definitely am open to listening, but from my experience, insurance companies don't want to cover this, and that's why when I talk to people, it's so important about doing the exclusion work, the habitat modification, rodenticides, whatever we need to do to get rid of that rodent problem, because if they don't take care of it, they're going to have all the problems you're seeing on the list here. To further that point, think about things like structural damage. Let's look at wiring. Mice are going to chew through electrical wiring, not only causing significant repair costs, but also increasing the risk of electrical fires, which account for tens of thousands of house fires annually. Damaged communication lines can disrupt business operations and home systems. When we look at insulation, mice often shred insulation to use in nesting, leaving behind contaminated materials that compromise thermal efficiency. Replacing insulation is costly and labor intensive, often requiring decontamination of affected areas. And just to go off of something we talked about here, especially when it comes to the insulation, how many of you are doing like extraction of insulation where you go up in an attic, you extract all the insulation and you blow it back in? I know a lot of pest control companies that are doing this because the insulation itself does become compromised when you have a rodent problem up there for a period of time. Now, I will also say this, as we mentioned in the slide here, it's very costly and labor intensive, so not everybody wants to do it. But how do you handle a situation like that? Let's say you go out, you do an inspection, you see there's a rodent problem, you know it needs to be taken care of, but you also know that the attic is just trashed and the insulation's destroyed. I think it's something we need to think about. Now, a lot of you will use like deodorizers, disinfectants, you'll even do sanitation types of services like that. And those can be good, but at some point that insulation, if it's just covered in rodent droppings and urine, it really needs to be removed and replaced. So this is just something you can look at on a case-by-case basis, but I would definitely have a plan in place for the areas where insulation is destroyed, because it's just not something you want to leave up there. At the same point in time, I understand because of the significant cost, not everybody wants to replace it, and sometimes we'll use like a disinfectant, we'll use a deodorizer, and that'll be good enough for that customer. Let's talk about health-related damages. Food contamination. A single mouse can contaminate far more food than it consumes. Droppings, urine, and fur render large quantities of stored food unsafe, contributing to food waste. Secondary infestations. Rodents often carry ectoparasites such as fleas, mites, and ticks, which can spread to humans and pets, leading to additional health concerns and extermination efforts. Another issue could be indoor air quality. This is going to be the accumulation of mouse droppings and urine contributing to poor air quality, exacerbating respiratory conditions such as asthma. Here's another thing we're introducing. After a while, when you have mice leaving droppings and urine everywhere, especially in areas where there's insulation, or even on floors, I've seen this as well, but up in attics especially, that air coming into the house, some of it's going to come through the attic. It's going to be an issue, especially when it comes to respiratory conditions such as asthma. I've seen this. I've been in people's homes where they have suffered from this. So this again goes back to what do we do in those areas where we have the urine and the droppings, and how do we clean them up? Because if we leave an area like that, we're obviously going to leave the people in this position. Allergenic risk. Proteins found in mouse urine, saliva, and dander are potent allergens, particularly in children, increasing healthcare costs and reducing quality of life for affected individuals. So once again, we got two issues here again. We got the allergen issue and we got the cost to take care of it with healthcare costs. Isn't it amazing? Every time we look with rodents, the costs just keep adding up. Let's talk about house mouse control. Effective control involves three aspects: sanitation, mouse-proof construction, and population reduction. The first two are preventative measures. When a mouse infestation already exists, some form of population reduction is almost always necessary. Reduction techniques include trapping, poisoning, and in rare instances, fumigation. And most all of you are probably familiar with trapping and obviously poisoning, things like that. But I did speak to a company one time in the state of Florida that actually fumigated a home. The rats were so bad that even after they did exclusion, even after they did trapping, they were going back daily and just taking multiple rats out. At the end of the fumigation, they went out and did an inspection. They found 63 dead rats in the home. So this is not a common thing, but I thought it was an interesting story, and I was really surprised when they told me. But then again, having done this since 1999, I think I've seen or heard about everything at this point. Sanitation. Proper sanitation is an important step in controlling house mouse populations. In particular, eliminate places where mice can find shelter. They cannot survive in large numbers if they have few places to rest, hide, or build nests and raise their young. Total elimination of mice through sanitation, however, is almost impossible. So we need to understand sanitation is very important. We have to change the habitat. We have to modify. People can't have junk everywhere. They can't have storage all around the perimeter of their homes. You can't go into a hoarder house and really think you're going to control mice. So keep in mind, this is where the customer or client's really going to have to step in. They're going to have to help us out because proper sanitation is not something we can do on our own. We're going to need that hand-in-hand partnership with our clients to get where we want to go when it comes to sanitation. Most buildings where food is handled or stored will have problems with house mice, no matter how clean they are, if they have not been mouse-proofed. So we'll talk more about this as we go, but I would hope each and every one of you understands if you don't do exclusion work, if you don't seal mice out, they're going to continue to come back in. It really doesn't matter how much trapping, how many rodenticides you use. You've got to make sure you seal them out. That's basically just mouse control 101, but I'm not sure everybody understands that, but if you don't, understand this is very, very important. Let's talk about prevention strategies, especially integrated pest management. Exclusion. Seal all entry points. Use durable materials like steel wool and caulk. Sanitation. Eliminate clutter and regularly dispose of trash. Clean up food and water sources promptly. Habitat modification. Trim vegetation near buildings. Remove debris and nesting materials. Rodent-proof construction. Mouse-proof construction is the most successful and permanent form of house mouse control. Build them out by eliminating all openings larger than 1/4 inch through which they can enter a structure. Seal cracks in building foundations and openings for water pipes, vents, and utilities with metal or concrete. Control strategies and innovations. Physical controls. Traps. When we look at traps, we're going to have traps that include snap traps, traditional but effective, glue boards, controversial but useful for monitoring, multi-capture traps, useful in large infestations. Traps. Trapping is an effective control method for controlling house mice. Although time-consuming, it is the preferred method in homes, garages, and other structures where only a few mice are present. Trapping has several advantages. 1. It does not rely on inherently hazardous rodenticides. 2. It permits the user to view his or her success. And 3. It allows for disposal of trapped mice, thereby eliminating dead mouse odors, which may occur when poisoning is done within buildings. So no matter how we look at it when it comes to traps and trapping, we're going to be using this method. If we do exclusion work, we could have rodents trapped inside the house or building. We're going to need to do trapping. I'm not saying that some people don't use rodenticides indoors. I just don't like to as much because of the issue of the odor when a mouse dies. So I prefer exclusion and trapping, but you have to decide what works for you. Rodenticides can have their place even indoors. Sometimes infestations are so big you need to use them. I'm just making the point that no matter how you look at it, trapping will be a staple in mouse control for the foreseeable future. Control strategies and innovations. Physical controls, glue boards. As we mentioned before, these are controversial but useful for monitoring. And I definitely like glue boards. I know they can be controversial, but just look what we have here. We have a tin cat down on the bottom left. So if you're working in a commercial establishment, a tin cat is going to be priceless. As you can see, it's got a little opening on the side where the mice can go in and they'll get stuck to the glue board. It's great not just for catching mice, but for the monitoring, because in those types of situations especially, we need to know what's going on. We need to know how many mice are in the area. We need to see where the activity is. So to me, glue boards are very useful for monitoring, and I really like them. Control strategies and innovations. Multiple capture traps. These are useful in large infestations. I'll only spend a moment on these, but these are great in areas where you suspect there's going to be several mice and you need to catch a bunch. So just keep in mind these multiple catch traps can be helpful. Instead of having to set a bunch of like snap traps or glue boards, you can use multiple catch traps and get a bunch of mice all in one. Innovations. Smart traps and bait stations with IoT integration for real-time monitoring. Bait stations have also evolved into electronic monitoring devices. The type of bait station can play an important role in saving time when there are hundreds or even dozens of stations on a property. Especially true on large accounts, this can save a substantial amount of time on the technician's part, allowing them more time for inspections, mechanical control, exclusion, and other treatments. Chemical controls, rodenticides. Use carefully to prevent secondary poisoning. So always make sure you're very careful with rodenticides. Make sure they're in approved containers. Don't just put these out in open areas or throw them up in an attic. Chemical controls, rodenticides. Use carefully to prevent secondary poisoning. One thing you definitely want to make sure is that you put these in approved containers. Don't just throw these out in crawl spaces, attics, or put them behind refrigerators and stoves, because there can be a big issue with secondary poisonings. So just be really careful with where you put these. Make sure they're in approved containers, and always follow the rodenticide label. Bait formulations. Rodenticides are available in many different bait formulations, and choosing the correct one can be difficult. The target species preference and the environmental conditions need to be considered. Bait should always be fresh and of high quality. Keep in mind, figure out what rodenticide is going to work best for your situation and check those bait stations. Don't let the bait sit in there and melt from the heat or get waterlogged. You and I both know rodents aren't going to go after that bait and it's not going to be effective. Here are some types of formulations and their advantages or disadvantages. Wax, paraffin blocks. These are ideal for high moisture situations, such as in sewers or outdoors where seed baits may spoil quickly. Some have holes drilled in them to make them easy to hang or string in place. Wax blocks are less acceptable to mice than seed or grain baits. Extruded baits. Similar in appearance to wax blocks, These are cooked, stabilized products with less wax than paraffin blocks, but are more moisture and weather resistant than seeds or pellets. Wax blocks and extruded baits feature multiple edges that rodents like to gnaw. Pelleted baits, highly weatherable and palatable. Mice often carry food to other locations, called translocation, and the pellet formulation makes it easy for them to do that. This can result in the bait being moved to an area that may endanger non-target animals or contaminate food. The bottom line here is be very careful with these. I've seen these moved all over residential homes. I've seen mice move them into kitchen areas, under cupboards, behind refrigerators, anywhere they could nest. These can be a really big issue, so just be very careful with them. Seed baits. Formulated especially for mice, as seeds are one of their preferred foods, usually packaged in place packs, which mice can tear open. Place packs keep the bait fresh. Meal baits. Made from several different food-grade seeds and grains, meal baits have high acceptance among rodents. They are not weather-resistant and are usually packaged in place packs. Since they cannot be translocated, they should be considered where there is a possibility rodents could transport bait to sensitive areas near food, children, or pets. Tracking powders, anticoagulant, or sometimes zinc phosphide, in a powder form that is placed in rodent runways or wall voids. The rodent ingests the poison when it grooms itself. Tracking powders have a higher percentage of active ingredient than baits and must be used with caution and where poison cannot be tracked onto food or other sensitive areas. Apply a paper-thin coating to lessen rodent avoidance. Water baits may be useful where food supplies cannot be limited, such as grain warehouses, and where water is scarce. Liquid baits mix with water and can be placed in fonts or similar containers in areas inaccessible to pets, children, and non-target wildlife. With all rodenticides, read all label directions on the bait and only place it in areas that are specified on the label. Put bait in locations out of the reach of children, pets, domestic animals, and non-target wildlife, or in tamper-resistant bait stations. Remove and properly dispose of all uneaten bait at the end of a control program. In addition, it is wise to collect and properly dispose of any dead rodents found during the course of rodenticide application. Reasons why rodenticide baiting may fail. 1. The time period that the bait is exposed is too short. 2. Insufficient bait is made available and there is insufficient replenishment of the bait. 3. Too few bait stations are used and they are placed too far apart. 4. Other food sources are available or are more convenient. 5. The bait formulation chosen is poorly accepted. Choose a different formulation. 6. Bait is not fresh. 7. Control program does not include a large enough area, allowing rodents to migrate in from other areas. And 8. Rodents are resistant to the rodenticide. Choose a toxicant with a different active ingredient or use traps. Traps. Trapping is an effective control method. When only a few mice are present in the building, it is usually the preferred control method. Trapping has several advantages. 1. It does not rely on inherently hazardous poisons. 2. It permits the user to make sure that the mouse has been killed. And 3. It allows for disposal of the mouse carcasses, thereby avoiding dead mouse odors that may occur when poisoning is done within buildings. Set traps close to walls, behind objects, in dark corners, and in places where evidence of mouse activity is seen. Place them so that mice will pass directly over the triggers as they follow the natural course of travel, usually close to a wall. Traps can be set on ledges or on top of pallets of stored materials if mice are active in such locations. Use enough traps to eliminate the rodents quickly. Using too few traps is a common error by individuals attempting to control mice. Mice seldom venture far from their shelter and food supply, so place traps no more than 10 feet apart in areas where mice are active. Leaving traps unset until the bait has been taken at least once pre-baiting often increases the success of trapping. An alternate to traps are glue boards, which catch and hold mice attempting to cross them, in much the same way flypaper catches flies. Place glue boards along walls where mice travel. 2 to 3 glue boards placed side by side, or larger glue boards used for rats, will be more effective than individual glue boards. Do not use them where children, pets, or desirable wildlife can contact them. Glue boards can be placed inside tamper-resistant bait boxes in exposed locations. Glue boards lose their effectiveness in dusty areas unless covered, and extremes of temperatures also may affect the tackiness of the glue. Glue boards are sometimes used to catch a mouse that is wary of snap traps. Disposal of dead rodents. Always wear intact rubber or plastic gloves when removing dead rodents and when cleaning or disinfecting items contaminated by rodents. Put the dead rodent in a plastic bag. The bag should be placed in a second bag and tightly sealed. Dispose of rodents in trash containers with tight-fitting lids. Traps can be disinfected by soaking them in a solution of 3 tablespoons of bleach per gallon of water or a commercial disinfectant containing phenol, such as Lysol. After handling rodents, resetting traps, and cleaning contaminated objects, thoroughly wash gloved hands in a general household disinfectant or in soap and warm water. Then remove gloves and thoroughly wash your hands with soap and warm water. The use of trade names in this publication is solely for the purpose of providing specific information or as examples. American Pest CEUs does not guarantee or warranty the products named, and references to them in this publication do not signify our approval to the exclusion of other products of suitable composition. All chemicals should be used in accordance with directions on the manufacturer's label. Use pesticides safely. Read and follow directions on the manufacturer's label. Products shown by Victor, Trap Sensor, Kennis, Bell, J.T. Eden, Versaris, Excluder, and Stuff It.